Our title story up first got a brand new update that wraps up the story, so I'll include the whole thing here so you get it start to finish. Enjoy! Won a lawsuit against a guy who tried to force me out of business because I broke his local monopoly by Romanweeb49. I'm 26 years old and decided to open my own business this year. Moving forward in this post, I should point out that I'm from a small town, 1,000 people, in the rural Midwest. Because of this, everyone has some sort of connection with someone. We went to one of the liquor stores in the closest city 30-ish minutes away to a small city of 8,000 people. When we were grabbing some of the alcohol for a party, I was looking at the prices and just saw how insane those prices were. For a 6-pack of local beer, they are charging $15. I was thinking about this and I figured that I could probably make bank opening a liquor store. Back in February, I was just furious about my crappy job and thinking out loud how cool it would be to own my own business to a friend. My friend's mom happened to be the president of the local bank. He told me, hey, with the pandemic, the bank has been struggling to find customers to give out loans. Right now, the bank is giving out loans for cheap. A couple of weeks later, I went in and I met with my friend's mom. I pitched my idea with the research that I'd done on alcohol prices, potential demand, and estimated income. I got the loan at a fantastic interest rate. I bought a building, which happened to be the former bank, and I hired my dad to help me renovate the building. My dad is a general contractor, and he gave me an excellent quote on materials and labor. After working everything out with the distributors, getting the proper licenses, and getting my paperwork that I needed for the government, I was ready to open my liquor store in May. I had started taking out ads in the local newspaper advertising my store and my prices. When I was in talks with my distributors, I learned, even with inflation and everything else, the liquor stores in the city had like an 80% markup. I talked to a local business owner and he suggested that I have around a 35 to 40% markup. Because of this, I was significantly cheaper than the closest liquor store and had a much wider selection than the gas stations and small local stores nearby. My hometown is near a national forest. As such, we have a ton of people who come up for weekends for recreational activities year-round. My first week, the week before Memorial Weekend, after opening, I had made a $4,000 profit. It was great being my own boss. If someone was rude to me or my girlfriend, oh, I'm sorry, you can do your business elsewhere. If someone tells my girlfriend a slur, they can go pay me 15% more at the register. Did the gang and I run out of alcohol? Time to grab my keys, not car keys, the store keys. My apartment's like 2 blocks away, and go to the store. That's not to say that it wasn't difficult running my own business, especially that my only employee was my girlfriend, and we were both working 6 or 7 10 to 12-hour days a week. I was both manager, accountant, and cashier, but screw it, it's so much nicer knowing that I can tell someone to pound sand for being a prick. A couple of weeks after Memorial Day, some old guy walks into my store a couple of minutes after I opened. He seemed friendly enough, but eventually offered to buy my store. I'm not going to say the amount, but it would not have even covered my principal on the loan. I rejected that proposal outright and refused to negotiate the sum higher. He walked out of my store saying, "Well, you'll be sorry you rejected that offer." The next month, a guy walked into my store and asked if I was the owner. After saying yes, I was informed that my business was being sued by this random guy that I'd never heard of for libel. After he left, I was freaking out and I decided that I was going to close early. When I got home, I Googled the guy and I soon saw a picture of that guy that tried to buy my store. Turns out that that's the guy who owns both of the liquor stores in the nearby city. It also just so happens that he is on city council. With a little bit of further digging, I learned that this city has an ordinance that reads, "Any business institution that does not fulfill the definition of a restaurant, tavern, or liquor dispensary will be excluded from obtaining a license for the sale of alcohol." Later, I discovered that that same guy happens to be the head of the board which approves liquor licenses. I love small-town corruption. Either way, I had a major issue. My maternal uncle happens to be a lawyer in a neighboring state. I decided to call him and try to get some legal advice. I talked to him and I read the documents that I had been handed and served over the phone and the research that I had done. After receiving all of the information that I had read off, I was expecting to get some sort of advice, but instead I heard, "Hang on, I gotta make a call." And he hung up. I'm freaking out. I was actually about to post my first post of legal advice, but I'll just be honest, I just wanted someone to tell me it was going to be okay, and I didn't need to crawl to this guy on my hands and knees. As I was writing the title, my uncle called back. "Hey, OP, I just got off the phone with my partner. He agreed that we can take your case pro bono. If you would like to accept, we can discuss at my office tomorrow at 1 o'clock. This is how I learned that my uncle is on the bar in 3 states. So we meet and we discuss the case. Turns out that the guy filed the libel suit against my business based on the ads that I took out in the local newspapers. He claimed that my ads were targeted to damage his and his business's reputation. There were a few other things that I had no idea what was being referenced, but Uncle assured me that we would win this case no problem. 3 weeks later, the case is dismissed, but after my uncle says, people like that piece of work will likely try to file another suit against you. If that happens, call me, and I promise that I will help. The next day, I get served again, but this time, I am the defendant. Not my store, me. I swear that I look at the documentation and the only thing that changed was, instead of my business's name, mine is listed as the defendant. Same thing happens. 4 weeks later, the case is dismissed. Over the next 3 months, I was sued just as many times. Before the 5th case's hearing, we had a settlement meeting. My uncle, the judge, the guy suing me, his lawyer, a bailiff, and I were sitting in this room. Judge says, "You two have been in court 4 times already. Is there any way we could come to an agreement that'll stop this cycle of faulty litigation?" The guy's lawyer says that they have an offer and hand it to my uncle, who then hands it to me. It essentially read that he'll stop all litigation if I sell my business for about 30% of the remaining loan principal. I outright rejected the offer, and I made a counteroffer. I said, "If you drop this case, I won't sue your butt for harassment." He bust out laughing. "Sue me? With what money? The legal fees alone ought to have drained you. You should be happy I chose to extend this offer and not sue your butt into bankruptcy and buy that crap hole from the bank when they foreclose on yourself." The judge, the bailiff, and the guy's own lawyer were looking at him aghast for saying the silent part out loud about the real reason I was getting sued. My uncle straight out said to him, "Oh, I'm sorry. Apparently you were never told. I have taken all of my nephew's cases pro bono. The only money he has spent on your litigations is gas. And bluntly, sir, I think your outburst has just ensured a suit against you." After that, we just left, and I was then informed a few days later the litigation was dropped. Right now, my uncle and I are talking about the future suit against the guy. I want to sue the guy for a very high amount to try and get press attention on this guy and his sketchy actions. Although my uncle warned me that we'll need to be careful, because if we set the damages too high, it'll look like we're just being vindictive. This suit won't be pro bono, but after getting sued 5 times for free essentially, I'm not going to complain. Looking back on this, I am so thankful that my friends and family supported me the entire way, especially my uncle. Without my uncle, I would have absolutely lost my business. Now, my uncle came into the store today and informed me unofficially that if I choose to continue with the lawsuit, his firm will take the case on a 25% contingency. If you were OP, how hard would you hit this other company? Let me know. Here's a continuation of that last story. Remember that slur? He actually wrote a story called "Customer Said to My Girlfriend, Go Back to China, Slur. She's Not Chinese." I opened a liquor store in my hometown this year, which my girlfriend and I are running together. Last night, I posted to the subreddit about something else that had happened. How I was able to legally charge this lady 15% extra, and my girlfriend said that I should tell the story. 4th of July weekend, and we were prepped for the busy weekend. Although around 8 o'clock, things had started to slow down. In the store, we have a TV which I use to run ads for different events, benefits, and a few other things for my store and a couple other businesses in town. When we have no customers in the store, my girlfriend and my employees are allowed to do the same, and I connect our TV to our phones and we'll stream Hulu or YouTube videos. So, we're standing there watching Family Guy when the door opens. I walk up to the register while my girlfriend is turning the TV back to the ads that we have running. This lady, Karen, who easily looks like she's in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, walks in, looking absolutely furious. Before I can say hi, she yells, "Does your manager know what you're doing?" My girlfriend and I share a glance. Because of our age, many assume we would just work there and aren't the owner and general manager. I look back and I nod my head. Yeah, I'm pretty certain that the manager and the owner have intimate knowledge of what we're doing. My girlfriend chuckles behind me. She huffs. "I don't care who you're sleeping with. I need this beer. Do you have it?" My girlfriend jumps up. "Yeah, I just stocked it. I'll..." The lady just snaps her attention directly to her. "What are you doing here?" My girlfriend is very confused by that comment. "I'm working." The lady says, "No, that's not what I meant, and you know that. My father fought in Korea, so why is someone like you here? This is an American company with American jobs. You should not be here." My girlfriend and I are absolutely slack-jawed at this woman for her blatant racism. Before we can say anything, she continues, "Your kind murdered Americans, so maybe you should go work for the Chinese or go back to China, you slur." Before this woman or my girlfriend can say anything, I yell, "Get the heck out of my store." The woman snaps at me, rounding the counter. She screeches back at me, "Who do you think you are?" "I'm the owner." I grab her arm as she starts whining and slapping my hand, but I just start dragging her to the door. "Now get out." I open the door to my vestibule and push her out into it. She turns back. She's standing in the vestibule and yells, "I'm calling the police for impersonation and assault." I didn't even dignify it with a response and just walked back in. I hadn't noticed, but my girlfriend had gone back into the office and I started consoling her. I've dealt with rude people all my life, but that woman crossed a line. Around 10 minutes later, I see a car pull into the parking lot on the monitor connected to the cameras. I look at it and see one of the trucks that's used by the sheriff's department. I wait a couple of minutes and I get up and walk out front and see this woman standing next to my door. She's giving a statement to the deputy, who I instantly recognize. I went to high school with this guy and we played football and baseball together. I walk out the door and am greeted by, "That's him. He's impersonating the owner and assaulted me." The deputy looks over at me, very obviously confused. "Him?" The lady rolls her eyes. "Yes, him." The deputy says, "Miss, he's the owner." She about goes ballistic on him. "No, he's not. Look at him. He's too young." The deputy is very obviously annoyed, but manages to explain to her that I am actually the owner. She then says, "But he assaulted me." I explain the situation to him, and he turns to her and says, "Miss, he is the owner and he asked you to leave, then he removed you from his business." The woman is standing there fuming when she finally yells, "Fine, I'll just get my husband's beer." I stand in front of the door and then I say, "No, you're not." "Excuse me? You call my girlfriend a slur. I'm not letting you back into my store." She huffs and yells, "Fine, I'm going somewhere else to get his beer." She leaves, and before the deputy got to his car, I stopped him and convinced him to stay for a while. I knew that lady was going to be coming back because nobody in my town carries that beer. 20 minutes later, the lady comes back, this time much humbler. "I'm sorry, but no one else in this town sells my husband's beer. We're having a barbecue tomorrow, and it would mean the world to him if I could get that beer." I sigh and say, "Well, I suppose it'll be all right." She is overcome by this look of gratitude. "But I will be charging you a 15% markup, and you will give my girlfriend an apology tomorrow." She stops. "Why?" I remind her what she said to my girlfriend. "Well, that markup, it's illegal." This is why I asked the deputy to hang around. "Actually, miss, as long as he lets you know about the markup, he's perfectly in line with state and county law." She bought her husband 2 6-packs of the beer and is then escorted outside by the deputy. The next day, she came in and handed my girlfriend a handwritten note to her. My girlfriend then calmly explained that she and her family are not Chinese, they're Hmong, which if you know anything about Hmong history, you'll understand the irony of the lady's "your kind murdered Americans." That's where we left off a while ago. As of now, the case is over and I can talk about it. So, to first explain why I didn't post any updates previously. When I filed the lawsuit, my lawyer was not to post anything about it online. I don't think that this had anything to do with the original post, but what he told me was that if the opposing counsel found a post and was able to link it back to me, they could argue that I was only filing a suit to gain online clout. But now the court case is over, so I can talk to you guys. So we filed the complaint about a month after the last case against me was dismissed. What we filed for was multiple accounts of malicious misuse of due process. After filing the complaint, we needed to serve the papers to the guy. Someone, I don't know who, must have told him because he dodged getting served for multiple weeks. The only reason the process server was able to serve him was because there was a meeting to approve the transfer of a liquor license between two businesses in the city. Ironic. So he and his lawyers answered the complaint and said everything in the complaint and the summons was a deliberate misrepresentation of the facts. None of the suits filed against me were in any way malicious, but given that the only thing that changed between most of the suits was the named defendant, kinda disproves that. He then went on to say that this current suit was simply a move by me to get revenge on him for trying to protect his business. Pretty much the entire answer was just him saying, "No, you." After that, we moved into discovery, which I'll talk about in a minute. Through the discovery process, there were a couple of motions for dismissal by the defendant's counsel. The first was just a general, all the facts are wrong, and this is a lawsuit filed in bad faith. This was immediately thrown out by the judge because the 4 suits filed back to back with only the defendant being changed indicate that this was a potentially malicious lawsuit. The second motion was that these weren't malicious because the defendants were different. Effectively, the argument is that if the same defendant, then it would be a malicious suit. But because the defendant kept getting changed from suit to suit, that means that there was a legitimate complaint that they were trying to get solved, which technically would be legal and I would have no standing. However, the judge acknowledged that while the argument is legally sound, if you simply look at the wording of the law, it completely violates the spirit that it was written in, and the actions of the defendant only serve to confirm that the previous lawsuits were filed in bad faith. So then the motion was tossed out of court. Later during discovery, the defendant filed for a venue change. Seems how we filed in my local court, they argued that the local jury would be biased toward me. This was dismissed because they forgot to ask for a jury trial. We were perfectly fine with proceeding with the bench trial, so we didn't ask for a jury. The judge decided then that because they didn't request a jury, a venue change would not offer any significant change in the trial. They used that decision and some history I have with the same judge to appeal to the state court to dismiss the case. They refused. So back to discovery. The whole process was extremely slow, and we were still in the middle of discovery when we decided to settle. We had received multiple settlement offers up to that point and rejected all of them. But at the end of November, the defendant decided to fire the manager of one of his businesses. The former manager then decided to turn over some text messages to the court. You see, we requested all communications about the malicious filings from last year that the defendant had made. That included text messages. That showed neither counsel nor the defendant did the proper diligence to comply with discovery. The defense was able to get that text removed from the evidence. So while the text might not have been able to be used as evidence if we had proceeded to trial, you can't erase that you hid evidence from the judge's memory. They don't tend to take that well. With this coming to light and the chicanery that the defendant had been pulling, the judge was just over it at this point. Our lawyers had to meet with the judge at the very beginning of this month, December, where the defense's counsel was reprimanded. After this, the defendant offered a really big settlement. After my fiancé and I discussed it, we decided to accept the offer. Our wedding is getting close, and frankly, we don't want to deal with court stuff anymore. The whole trial process was still months away, and there wasn't any guarantee that we would have gotten any more money. Unfortunately, it's not the nuclear revenge I and my fiancé, and possibly you, were hoping for. Although the settlement, after I settled the contingency pay for my lawyer, did repay the remainder of my loan, and we will have a nice chunk of money left over. It sounds like justice prevailed because this story goes on for a while, and you know that process takes a while, but when it finally comes through and you're on top of it, it's like this. It's just awesome. Even if it's not a nuclear revenge, it's still a lot of money to come back to you. What do you think? As we get into the next story, I have to tell you something. Hey, also, I added more stories to the new 24/7 HOA Karen radio stream on the channel, perfect to binge or play for background noise while you sleep. Check out the link in the description or on the front page of the channel. It looks like this. Neighbor tossing garbage in my backyard by Valuable Adagio 8283. For the past 2 years or so, my abhorrent neighbor has tossed garbage in my backyard, specifically beer bottles and cans. 2 years ago, we had a car that wasn't working and it was sitting in our driveway for some time. The neighbor, whom we had never conversed with before, left a note on our mailbox with their number to discuss the possibility of selling it to them. We ended up donating the car and not selling it to the neighbor, which was apparently an act of war. He began harassing us with profanity and text messages. We told him we do not want trouble and prefer to keep to ourselves in the neighborhood that we've lived in our entire lives. Still, no respect. Safe to say, we changed our number and never spoke again. At that time, the guy told me to cut my freaking trees. Unsure why, considering none of my trees are over his property, and all of our surrounding neighbors have the same amount of trees, plus at an equal distance. If leaves blow onto his pavement, big deal. I can't control what trees and nature do, and I certainly am not going to cut down any trees to appease to a rude neighbor. Honestly, the way I see it, our leaves blow into his pavement. They don't have a yard, so that must constitute garbage in my backyard. Great logic. Not a smart one over there. No trees are of danger or causing a nuisance. And again, none are hanging over anyone's property line. Only on my property. In the past, he came onto my property in the middle of the night and cut down an orange tree that was growing slightly over the fence line. The entire tree in my yard for me to cut up and haul to the curb for pickup. Additionally, the guy runs his car business out of the house and fixes them, revving engines during what should be quiet times of the day. We don't have an HOA, but deed restrictions state that you cannot run a business from your home. People come in and out looking at his vehicles that he's selling. This isn't even an issue to me, but coupled with the garbage, it's the cherry on top. We have not spoken since the car debacle, but occasionally beer cans and broken bottles will appear in my backyard, specifically over the fence that we, and only we, share, so there's no doubt that this is the guy who's doing it. I collect every piece of garbage in one trash bag that has grown over time, and I installed cameras around my home, and I put up no trespassing because his adult family member forcefully opened my fence to get their ball, and no dumping signs all around my home to truly push the point home and to cover my butt if I ever involve the city. I have several videos of me picking up the garbage and showing the cameras. Unfortunately, these aren't 24/7 recording cameras and they only record when there's movement, so I've never caught the guy in the act. I'm fairly certain that this individual tosses them in my ditch as well from his car. I don't have a camera set up on the street, so this is difficult to capture or prove. The guy puts out his trash and recycling bins every week, so obviously there's a place to put the trash. My other neighbors are also not fond of him, but I unfortunately am the one who shares a fence. Constantly picking up beer cans and bottles also triggers memories of my mother who passed from the effects of alcoholism. I've seen the cops go over there a few times in the distant past, but nothing recently. Not to be a jerk, but the guy's probably an alcoholic with Napoleon syndrome. I have no desire to speak to or confront this person because nothing will change. My family lives in anxiety and fear and worry that calling the city or the police would just escalate or cause this person to retaliate. This is also a danger to my pets who roam the areas that the trash is being thrown. Sometimes my yard people accidentally run over the trash too. I don't even want to involve the city or authorities, but I don't know what else to do. Do I need video evidence of the guy throwing trash? If so, I'm looking at 24/7 recording cameras. I know many of you would say to just talk to him, but truly, I would want a police officer there to mediate. Again, I want peace, and involving the authorities or the city is the last thing I want to do, but it's gone on for far too long and is causing anguish and discomfort in my own home. The neighbor knows we won't retaliate because we're probably considered too nice or scared. And he's right, we don't want to confront. All we do is pick up the garbage and put it in the same bag we've been collecting it in. The neighbor has never confronted us since we changed our number, just keeps tossing the bottles over. Do you think that OP should get a lawyer for the tree too and have a paper trail? Let me know. I've had it with my neighbor. I purchased a house last year, and one of my neighbors has been very rude from the start. She's a young widow who yells at me from her house. At this point, I don't feel like I can enjoy my yard or look out my windows in fear of getting yelled at. I've tried to be a good neighbor. After moving in, I went to her house to introduce myself, asked her for permission to attach my fence to hers, and offered to fix her fence panels that had fallen, which she accepted. After fixing her fence panels, she came to yell at me, implied that I didn't understand her because I have an accent, and told me not to touch her fence or her side of the property line. The workers were trying to cover a hole in her fence so my dogs wouldn't escape to her yard. I apologized. They undid the work and left the hole untouched. My dogs stayed on my yard, but her dogs and cat are constantly outside unsupervised and like to use that hole to potty in my yard. Later, her fence got damaged after a storm and she hired people to fix it. She didn't give me a heads up that she would have workers on my yard fixing it or that they were parking in my property, so I couldn't use my yard most of the day. I ended up closing out the fence on my side parallel to hers a couple of weeks later, just not to deal with her, her animals, or her fence anymore. Another time, I heard some very loud yelling outside and I looked out my window to see if there was an emergency. Turns out, she was yelling at her kids and I was scared for them, so I kept an eye on the situation for a bit in case I had to call the cops. When she saw me looking, she diverted her anger solely towards me and started yelling at me, calling me horrible names about children and all sorts of names. Things have been fine for a while until I recently adopted a puppy. The first couple of days, it would sometimes bark when playing with my other dogs, who were pretty quiet. It had only been 2 or 3 days before she yelled at me from her house about the barking. I've mostly trained him not to bark now, but I'm self-conscious every time I take him outside. I finally reached my tipping point with this person today. There was a bad storm and one of her trees broke off, damaging my new fence and her fence. I hired a contractor to remove it and asked him to not touch the limbs on her fence or he might get yelled at. He said he knows her and that she's likely acting up because she's a widow. He contacted her and told me that she said it was okay to fix it. He ended up removing the limbs from her fence too, and the work was all paid by me. I didn't even get a thank you from my neighbor. Am I being unreasonable? I don't think that being a widow entitles her to treat me like this. What can I do about this person? I feel like I've been taken advantage of while also having to deal with her rudeness. I feel very uncomfortable living in my house. I actively try to be a decent neighbor in person so often that I have a hard time understanding why others don't try as well. It doesn't seem like there's anything that I can do about it other than accept it and ignore her. Have you ever had a bad neighbor that did not respect you and your space? Like, how would you handle it or what would you do? I have before, and I'll tell you, having good neighbors makes it all the better, and you cannot take that for granted. What would have you done? Terrible neighbor time. The guy who lives in the apartment below us keeps accusing us of being loud despite the thick concrete floors and 3 active construction sites within 1,000 feet of our building. So let me preface this story by saying that I rent in a mostly owner-occupied building in Philadelphia that was built in the 60s, so most of the residents are old and curmudgeons. So without further ado, I have a pretty insane neighbor that I'm dealing with right now and just wanted to vent here real quick while his latest interaction is still fresh in my head, so you guys get the most unhinged version of me venting, because if there's one thing I can do is make unhinged content. First off, I'm alerted to our front door, which we keep unlocked during the day when we're home to allow our friends in the building to randomly pop in, like the TV show Friends or Seinfeld do, which we modeled this type of behavior in our friendship on, and we love our awesome neighbors who do this. But instead of one of our friends, it's the guy who lives under us coming up to complain about the amount of noise we're making. It is 1 p.m. when he does this, to which, not for nothing, it's not necessary to be the quietest during that time of day. But regardless of that, my girlfriend was on a work phone call and I was writing emails. So naturally, I was very confused as to him making a habit out of complaining about noise that we make, which, well, that's one thing, but then he also emails our building to complain and narc on us, which is also fine, I guess, but you gotta pick one or the other. You can't do both or else you're a jerk. So this guy keeps saying that we are making these loud sounds, and we had since we moved in. So I finally went down to his apartment and had my girlfriend jump and stomp as loud as she could, and you could barely hear it. So I'm like, bro, it's not us stomping. I'm pretty sure it's gotta be one of the 3 active major construction sites that are within 1,000 feet of our building, and you somehow cannot discern the direction of the sound. I almost lost it on him because this is like the 10th time he's come up to our door and also emailed the building to complain. So if he escalates it, I'm going to have to start a paper trail to avoid getting a write-up or something. When he came up to complain and accuse us, my girlfriend was on a work call, so I need to be silent. And I was on my PC sitting down, and maybe I was like tapping my feet, and the floor is super thin, which is why I did the stomping experiment. But once I heard her stomping and how a slight muffled sound that was, barely audible, and in no way bothersome or loud enough to wake someone up unless they're one of the lightest sleepers I met. Cars driving by outside make more noise than the stomping did, and he is all the way up on the 8th floor. The kicker is, despite all of this, he is still blaming us for the sound and not believing that it cannot be us due to the muffled stomping that my girlfriend did that came through. And despite this stomping she was doing is nowhere near loud enough to wake him up from a nap like he claimed. Meanwhile, they're building an apartment across the street from us and installing a new giant statue and redoing the park next to that. Not to mention, the state just started to redo the stretch of 95 that goes from Market to South Street, which is only 1,000 feet away from us. So I'm guessing that the loud random booming sounds are coming when they drop some of the heavy stuff, which has been constant since we moved in last June. So far, I've been killing him with kindness, but I think he's mistaking it for weakness, and he's not relenting whatsoever. The biggest yikes ever. You know what they say when you assume what it makes out of you and me? Well, this guy is also probably afraid to admit that he's wrong, even if he is proved right. And even if he is proved right, he's probably not going to admit it. You ever ran into somebody like that at Karen? Let me know. Sue Karen, she towed my deployed brother's car off our property with an update. Click the video on your screen so you find out what happens to Karen, and I'll see you there.